Yesterday, there was a phone call between Ukrainian President Zelensky and American President Biden. After the phone call, there was notice in the press that Zelensky asked President Biden to tone down the talk about Russia, which I kind of thought for a while was a little bit escalating the conflict, since we are saying continuously the escalation is imminent, there'll be a war. I am not necessarily saying it might or might not be, but most important, what do you think about it? Do you think the American conversations right now are designed to calm down the situation, or do you think the conversation themselves are now escalating the situation?
First of all, thank you very much. Thank you for a kind introduction, and thanks FPRI for hosting us here. I hope that we'll make this event memorable and provocative and inspiring. To answer your question, we have such a saying in Russian that if you want peace, prepare yourself for war. That's a very wise saying. Actually, the whole Cold War actually was dictated of that principle. And really, you need to be ready for the aggression. You need to be ready to defend your country. You need to have strong military. You need to protect your borders. You never should rely on some promises that some neighbors would be nice. You need to brace yourself for whatever may happen to you. But at the same time, what is happening right now with all those discussions about war is actually very disturbing, and it hurts Ukraine a lot. When you were introducing myself, you were saying that I was a long time in politics, but I also was for a long time in business, and I'm currently doing business in Ukraine. I'm bringing U.S. investment into the country and working with a lot of industrial and technology projects in the country. I would say that right now what I see is that people really are scared. It's actually a very unique situation. It was 1 year ago. I think that we were really facing the situation when another military clash between Russia and Ukraine could happen. So we are living in the situation of ongoing war since 2014. Not so many people recognize that we have this war. Literally every day people are dying in the front lines. So it never stopped. It was going higher, lower, but it's already more than 15,000 people died at that war. That's longer than World War II, by the way, already. And it's really bloody. But nevertheless, you know, whether there would be another confrontation 1 year ago, the clash was very much probable. I believe in the psychology of Kremlin and Mr. Putin personally. I think that he was at that time thinking that Ukraine is preparing its own offensive in eastern Ukraine, and that President Zelensky is prepared to take Donbass back, preparing to start the counterattack, and was really getting the forces by the Ukrainian border. But at that time, a lot of experts, military experts, security experts, and leaders of Ukraine, they were saying, guys, you know, alarm, you know, there is a Russian army getting together, preparing to fight right by our borders. Everybody was keeping silence, and the general population was silent as well, because nobody believed that that would actually happen. Right now, the situation is right the opposite. Because if we look at the balance of military power by the border, it's changed over recent 4 or 5 months, but pretty much insignificantly. There was a lot of demonstration of force on behalf of Mr. Putin. So he was moving military regiments, doing it in public, absolutely openly. But whether the numbers of Russian military changed significantly? No, they did not. Right now, Ukrainian intelligence, just recent official number that was reported by Ukrainian Security Council less than a week ago, they reported 109,000 troops in Western Russia, which is compared to 99,000 half a year ago. So did it change? Yes, it did change, but the change is within 10%. But at the same time, and all the experts are saying there will be no military confrontation. There is no reason for Putin to attack. It would be very costly for Russia. Ukrainian military is prepared to meet the enemy. There would be a lot of corpse sent back home. There would be a lot of dead bodies. Putin, he is in this sense, you know, I know that these comparisons, they always sound very boldly, but nevertheless, he's like Hitler in his early days. You know, when Hitler was taking other countries without significant casualties, that was fine, and the nation was applauding. When the real bloodshed started, the public opinion started to shake. Putin knows those examples from history, and he doesn't want his approvals, which are already, you know, not very high because of the pension reform that was happening in Russia 2 years from now, and stuff like that. He doesn't want them to fall more. So I don't think that he's ready to fight, and the experts are telling about this, and Ukrainian leadership is telling about this. But at the same time, we read a lot of articles in the Western media that, you know, he's going to attack tomorrow, literally. The capital started to leave Ukraine. Many of my friends, entrepreneurs, they are evacuating their families. They are preparing for Plan B, Plan C. They relocating their businesses, and that's all very challenging for the country, and so we need to do something about it.
Well, thank you. That was very informative. However, I have, actually, I want to give Curt a chance to also respond, and I am in the camp just that I do not think that the war is imminent. I also in agreement with you that I think the more rhetoric is going on, the more Putin is going to be painted in a corner, and something needed to be done. And also, I want to follow up with Curt for two questions. One is, when Zelensky ran for presidency in Ukraine, one of the platforms that he ran on was that he wanted to get Donetsk and Donbass back to Ukraine. That was his platform. So do you think that's something that precipitated the escalation? And also another question I have, since the original buildup was started in April of 2021, when there is war games started on the Donetsk-Donbass border, do you think there is something else that happened between that period of April and the period in August where there is an escalation?
Well, first of all, I want to again applaud Ilya. People need to understand that as a member of the Duma, he's the only single member of the Duma to vote against Putin when he sought approval to invade Ukraine the first time. The only one. What an historic decision that was. What a life-saving, and what an immense amount of courage you had, Ilya, to stand up against Putin and say no.
I was doing my job.
You did your job, but you know the heat you took for that, so much so that he was forced out of his homeland and now lives in Ukraine. The one thing that I've learned about all of my years in studying the former Soviet Union, going in there when it was the Soviet Union as a part of a State Department program, was the Russian mindset, and the Russian people are masters at chess. They understand the game very well, and you know what I'm talking about, Ilya. In fact, the leader of the World Chess Federation for years has always been a Russian. As much as the West would like to say that we're the champions of chess, more often than not it's a Russian, because Russians understand the need to be preemptive, the need to think 3-4 steps ahead of what's going to happen. And I'm sure you understand this, Ilya, because of and I think that is what we're seeing in this current kind of effort between Putin and Ukraine, or the perception of a problem between Putin and Putin's a very smart man, and his background is FSB, KGB, so he's always thinking ahead. What can I do to convince the Americans and the West that they should not allow Ukraine to become a part of NATO? What can I do to recreate the motherland? I saw that when I was in Congress, and in fact, I went to the administration. I said he's never going to try to do that through NATO or through military means because of NATO. So what did he do? He chose to use energy. Energy became the tool to consolidate power in the former Soviet states, in the Eastern European countries. And we've known for the last 20 years that Putin's goal since he went in the year 2000 was to, when he didn't get what he wanted from the Americans, when President Bush was the president, when he didn't get the respect that he thought he deserved, he made a decision with Miller, the CEO of Gazprom, to decide to use energy as a tool to bring the power back to what was the Soviet states. And unfortunately, in my opinion, we made some missteps. I think approving the pipeline over there was a misstep on the part of the Americans. Only empowered Putin more to give him more leverage over Europe. And there are other pipelines that are also in the planning stages or being developed beyond that particular project. In terms of the effort that what Putin has taken in the past, all of his goals are to reestablish Russia as the motherland, the ties to Lukashenko and Belarus, the reaching out in an attempt to deal with Georgia and Azerbaijan with Aliyev. It's all around the idea that Putin wants to create this buffer around his nation, much like it was during the Soviet time, but he cannot do it militarily. So I think it's too early to think that we're going to see a military confrontation. Perhaps I'm wrong. As President Biden has said, only time will tell. But I think we need to understand that we should be taking steps to minimize the possibility of this action, both with intense negotiations, and I understand that's underway right now by our strategic leadership from the White House and the State Department, but also with our intelligence agencies, but also understand that we cannot recreate the opportunities that we missed back when I was in the Congress. When I started Duma Congress with Steny Hoyer as my co-chairman, and we had 100 members of the Congress interacting with the Duma, our goal was to achieve a dialogue because the Russian people have never been our enemies. When 9/11 happened, and I was in Moscow a week after 9/11, we could not see through the fence around our embassy because there were tens of thousands of handwritten notes, teddy bears, you remember this, Ilya, all kinds of memorials. The Russian people were praying for America during our darkest hour. The Russian people have no problem with us, and the American people have no problem with the Russian people, as evidenced by our large diaspora in Philadelphia with Ukrainians and Russians like you. What we have are, unfortunately, the case of some of our agency decision makers having, I think, short-sighted decisions that have been made that have increased the thought that a person like Putin, who is a hardliner at heart, that we might be looking to have Ukraine eventually make a move on Russia, which is ridiculous. That's never going to happen. From the days of Kuchma on through Yushchenko and the other leaders, all of whom I dealt with, they have no desire to take on Russia or embarrass Russia. But we have not done, in my opinion, enough to convince Putin and the Russians that it's not our goal to embarrass him or to threaten the state of the motherland. What I think we could have done, and in fact, we did a document that I will hold up here that was completed in 2000 when Bush reached out to Putin and they were basically deciding to have a new relationship called New Time, New Beginning, 48 pages, 108 recommendations. This document was signed, and you can get this on my website, or if you contact FPRI, I'll send it to you. If you'll notice the signatures on the front page, Joe Biden, Dick Lugar, Carl Levin, and me. On the inside, hundreds of members of the US Congress saying it's time for a change, including Bernie Sanders and Mike Pence. Can you imagine? From Bernie Sanders to Mike Pence, we wanted to make a change. On the Russian side, the Duma unanimously passed it, the Federation Council, the Academy of Sciences, the Ukraine Rada. we had separate documents for each country. So what we have to look at historically is, why did we not take advantage of that opportunity? I believe, and I'd like Ilya to follow on from his perspective, that we embarrassed Putin early on when he became president in 2001 and caused him to move toward this direction of recreating this effort because of his fear that he wasn't going to get the respect, that we might make a move. And I think that is the root cause of why we're here. Now we have to look at how do we de-escalate this, and how do we get our country to come to an agreement with Putin that would be a bad move, which I think he's willing to listen to, but also respect the leadership of Ukraine and not do anything that the Ukrainians feel would cause us to preemptively cause a problem between the two countries on the border. Ilya, do you agree with me about Putin when he first went in? Was he expecting more?
Actually, I wanted you to follow up on what Kurt said, and I also have one more wrinkle to this question. When Putin decided to go into Crimea, why do you think, if he really wanted to bring Ukraine back into Russia's fold, why did he stop? Why did he not continue going? And that problem would have been solved in 2014, I guess.
Thank you very much for your brilliant questions. Kurt, I think that you are accurate with 95% of what you said, but there is the remaining 5. And that remaining 5 is about Putin's mentality and his motivation. Is he smart? Yes, he is. But he is a kind of guy who always trades strategy for tactics. He is the type of guy who does not recognize any win-win strategy. He just does not believe they exist. He believes in zero-sum game. He believes that if he wins, somebody loses. If somebody wins, he loses. That's his take on life. That's very unfortunate, but that's the case. And respect, yes, he definitely wants some respect, because being, a low-level yard boy from St. Petersburg suburbs, he was growing in a semi-mobster environment, regularly beaten by his neighbors. And the question of respect, yes, psychologically is important for him. But the question, what is respect and how to earn it? He, I believe, when he came to power, and that's also very important to understand about Putin, that he didn't come to power as a usual politician who was struggling his way up to the very top, like debating others and through certain struggles. He inherited the power. He was given the power. And as we know now, he was even protesting from getting this power, because that's a very well-known story when Boris Berezovsky came to Putin when he was chairman of FSB and saying that you are chosen by Mr. Yeltsin to become his successor. Putin said, can I become chairman of Gazprom instead? Please, guys, I will make you rich. Put somebody else to be the president. And no, he will be the president. And he turned the whole government into large Gazprom at the end of the day. But when he was coming to power, he was coming with the idea of not just cooperation with the West, but with being part of the West. At the end of the day, his task, what he was assigned with by Yeltsin's family and Russian oligarchs, was to provide legitimacy for the privatization that happened in Russia in the 90s, to provide them respect that they deserve with their money. And as Putin likes to say, money beats evil. That's also another of his principles. So what was cornerstones of his foreign policy program? He was running it in year 2000 and his campaign. Joining NATO, joining European Union, joining WTO. There were 3 pillars of his own campaign. Yeltsin never did that. He never went that far in being pro-Western leader like Putin did in the year 2000. And then what I would definitely agree with you, I think there were numerous mistakes on behalf of the West to push him away with that. And even in the year 2001, when 9/11 happened, Putin was the first foreign leader to call Bush and to offer assistance. And Russia at that time fully opened the skies, they opened transit to Central Asia. It's supported with a military base in Kyrgyzstan for US troops to enter Afghanistan. Putin surrendered military bases in Cuba and in Vietnam. So he's done a lot of things because he was called national traitor at that time. Now I'm called the national traitor. At that time, he was called national traitor by a lot of what's called Russian patriots, false patriots, of course. But it was not appreciated. It was not followed up at all, and he was pushed backwards until in what it was 2007 when he made his Munich speech with the list of complaints against the West that you guys are enemies. But what he was seeking always, he was seeking to establish certain rules of the game. Because he was, again, being a former FSB person, and there are no former FSB people, he always is pretty much paranoid. And he was thinking somebody is planning to remove him from his office. And he does not believe in the power of people, but he believes in the power of America, and other Western nations, that it's you guys who want to remove him from the office. I wish that was true, but unfortunately, I don't see the evidence that that's true. But he believes it is. And after that, just out of self-preservations, out of feeling of his own security, he is trying to establish these rules of the games. And he thinks that the only rules that potentially could be created, this is some kind of a post-Yalta type rules. And that's where Crimea comes into the picture. Many people think, and that's where I disagree with you when you're saying, that his goal is to prevent NATO and whatever. It's like, look at the map, NATO already, by the time he took over Crimea, NATO already was controlling half of the perimeter of the Black Sea. So when you're saying to Russian public, we took Crimea to prevent NATO to open a military base in Crimea, why would NATO need a military base in Crimea? That doesn't make any sense. If we listen at his complaints, NATO would create a military base in Ukraine, and it would shorten the missile range to Moscow. Look at the map, you can put the same missiles that already exist in NATO members like Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania.
Easily.
What does it solve? That's bullshit. So he just justifies totally different things. To take over Crimea, it needs his internal power. That's not about
But why
NATO.
stop at Crimea?
Why would he need anything else? Look at the polls. Many people take Putin as a dictator. He doesn't think about the popular support. That's not true. The most recent example that a careful observer might look at is just recently he pulled back the legislation on COVID from State Duma because the majority of population was against the new restrictions, lockdowns, and whatever. So the act that was already there, prepared to be voted on, and which was already passed first reading, he pulled it back because he doesn't want to do any unpopular actions. Taking over Crimea was popular because majority of Russians do genuinely believe that it's unfair that Crimea fell into Ukraine. Right. In 1954. And war with Ukraine is extremely unpopular. And even those who totally for the annexation of Crimea, the majority is against the war with Ukraine.
I agree. This is actually the second FPRI event today. And it was very interesting at the first event. I'm just going to give a shameless plug to FPRI early event. One of the scholars said, it's very interesting that EU is silent as to what's happening on the border right now. So I'm going to start with Kurt with this question. Why do you think EU is not taking sides one way or another, or at least silent?
I think part of the problem was we approved the pipeline for Germany, which basically, in my opinion, neutralized Germans' support for the U.S. position. And I think there's kind of a wait-and-see attitude about U.S. leadership, what it's going to be. Is it going to be strong leadership and decisive? And I'm a friend of Joe Biden's, but this is not about friendship now. When you're dealing with any Russian leader, you're always dealing, as Ronald Reagan would say, you have to deal from a position of strength. So I don't know. I mean, I think Europe has mixed emotions about what the administration is talking about, and there's even reports they're not going to join with us in the most severe sanctions. Let's face it, we could shut Russia's economy down. If we ended the SWIFT process for them, that would create huge havoc. And I don't think Europe is ready to support that.
I understand. I know that rallies are there with the questions from the audience. So I am, as many of the questions I personally have and how interesting this discussion is, we're going to turn it over to Raleigh to ask the audience questions.
We have a lot of questions. There's a great deal of interest.
A lot of
in this.
questions, not a lot of time.
A lot of questions, exactly. First of all, thank you. Fascinating comments to all of you. A question from the audience, Mr. Ponomarev. How would you compare the dissident community today with that of the 1960s and 70s? Size, activity, role in society, their influence, their following?
Unfortunately, the current state of Russian opposition is moving to the state it was in 1960s. Just that time it was developing, and this time it's regressing. There is actually no such thing as an organized opposition. There's like, if you take opposition as like organized political groups, they no longer exist in Russia. There are certain people who are more or less opposition-minded. There is so-called system opposition in the parliament, so parties which are opposing government, social economic measures, but do not oppose the general political order that has been imposed by Mr. Putin, but that's kind of mild opposition, or as we call it, Her Majesty opposition. But that previous year, 2021, was actually a major turning point, because one of our colleagues in the opposition, Mr. Navalny, was sent to jail. Mr. Khodorkovsky is totally isolated in the West. So the infrastructure of both Khodorkovsky and Navalny totally deteriorated, and people were either imprisoned or had to leave Russia. So the opposition is totally decapacitated. We, with my friend Harry Kasparov, speaking of chess, and several others, we are running what's called Free Russia Forum, which is currently the largest.
I was part of it, actually,
Yes.
in Houston.
That was
in Austin.
In Austin.
In Austin, yes. I remember that. Yes,
Yeah.
it was
So
a very interesting moment. With Khodorkovsky was there.
Yeah.
And Gasparov was there. I remember the moment, yes.
That's probably the largest assembly of Russian-speaking community across the globe. And in Vilnius, we're trying to get more people from Russia. And before they were coming, but now because of COVID restrictions, it was another blow to the opposition. In general, the state of the opposition is pretty bad.
I understand.
Another question. How are the oligarchs and different Siloviki members influencing the Kremlin's current position?
Again, what I started to say is that it's a mistake to take Putin as a dictator who just pushes his will through. He is rather being compared to a spider which sits in the center of a web and pulls the different strings. What actually Putin unfortunately has accomplished over last 21 years when he was in power, he totally destroyed all the institutions in Russia, even the institution of the presidency. As Mr. Medvedev brilliantly proved, being a president doesn't mean that you have power in the country. Being Putin means that you have power in the country. And that creates a grave threat for the system. Mr. Volodin, the current Speaker of the House in Russia, Speaker of Duma, a year and a half, 2 years ago, he said the phrase for which he was mocked very much, that no Putin, no Russia. But I'm very much afraid that he is actually right at the moment. And that's a conscious Putin's approach. He wants to create a situation that without him, all the clans, all the oligarchs, all his cronies, all the security forces, everybody would start fighting for power, and that they understand this and that they're afraid of this, and that they would prefer to preserve Putin as the function which balances all of them, but not to get into that fight. So he provokes internal tensions, but what it means that when there would be no Putin, and at the end of the day, there would be no Putin because he's mortal. And, you cannot create doubles forever. He would disappear one day, and then the whole web would die. And what would happen to Russia after that, to a great nuclear state? Nobody knows.
And history proves it's right. How many times did we watch through history when a dictator was tumbled and then the country's falling apart rather than keeping the country together, might be under the regime that some people disagree with.
And that's what I'm always telling to people in Ukraine. When I'm asking, so what's about Crimea? I say, like, you will get Crimea literally over Putin's dead body. But when it happens, that's the time. Because then, the country will start to collapse, and that's the momentum to revert the situation back.
Thank you. Another question. How realistic is Putin's perception that the US, NATO's key animating theme is Russian regime change? How much did the Libya, Syrian, and the ousting of Viktor Yanukovych really have on Putin's calculus and his sense of security? It is, and this is the questioner's comment, it is not at all clear to me that NATO, the US, or anyone else can seriously threaten his regime, at least not militarily.
I wish somebody would have an objective to remove Putin from his office, but I don't think that's true. And I have endless examples which I can talk about when there were precise actions that could have been taken to weaken his position and which were never taken. And I believe that the same situation, we in Ukraine, people in Ukraine always remember a famous George H.W. Bush speech in Verkhovna Rada in 1991, so-called Chicken Kyiv speech, when he said, it was like 2 months, I believe, before the collapse of the Soviet Union, no matter what, just don't split away from the Soviet Union. In 2 months from that, Ukraine announced its independence. And I think that that's exactly what American administration wants at the moment. It's afraid of Russia starting to collapse. And people in Washington, they do understand what's happening with Putin, what I just saying, answering the previous question. They're afraid of that. And they would rather have weak Putin, but in the office, than to remove him. And I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding of Mr. Putin. He genuinely believes that that the West wants him to be removed, but that's not the case. And West does nothing to remove him.
We have another question from Ambassador Alexander Vershbow.
Oh, wow.
Ilya, thanks for your moral clarity as always. What's your answer to the question, what does Putin really want to pull back from the threat of new aggression? He knows by now that he won't get the US and NATO to accept his sweeping demands for security since 1991. Will he settle for talks of arms control as the US has proposed? Is he looking for a compromise on Donbas in the Minsk talks that would give him more leverage over Ukraine? Something else?
Thank you, Ambassador, for this question. And I very much hope that you will be able to influence the situation somehow and bring more clarity to the table. Because I believe that Putin's end goal at this very moment is not Ukraine, but Belarus. I do believe that Putin wants to restore USSR because that's a question of his power inside Russia. But USSR, where there is no Soviet and no socialist, but maybe union of Slavic sovereign republics, I don't know, with the same name. Belarus is the way for him to regain the popularity surge which he had after the annexation of Crimea, because when he annexed Crimea, that was taken by many Russians and many Crimeans as the step towards restoration of the Soviet Union. And despite many economists saying that Russians currently richer than they were during Soviet Union times, the reality is that it's World Bank statistics of the year before previous, that still more than 50% of Russian population live worse than it was in the Soviet Union. If you take the average, taking the most rich circles of the society, then the average would be higher. But the reality is that the majority of Russian population is more poor than they were in the Soviet Union. That's why they're nostalgic about the Soviet Union. And any promises that they will go back at that time, they would meet with applause. And I think that why Putin consciously have made this very unrealistic pledge with his demands towards NATO and the United States, it's a part of his propaganda game inside the country. He says, you see, we were transparent, we were straightforward, we did tell them what we want. They could have done it. They decided to turn us down. We would act asymmetrically and would protect ourselves from NATO advancing to our borders by taking over Belarus. And it's even would not be like a war with Belarus, it would be a union. Just look, the military maneuvers in Belarus are happening in February. I don't think that Belarus would be taken militarily, but nevertheless, that's what's happening right now. At the end of February, there would be a referendum on the amendments to Belarus constitution, which everybody forgets about, which would change the power of Belarusian presidency. And Lukashenko would most likely eventually would move to be the chairman of all Belarus People's Assembly, like a quasi-parliament of the country. And that paves the way for Putin to move forward. I'm not sure whether Putin would stay in power until the end of his term, or whether he would resign prematurely to become the leader of the combined state. I think that's the most realistic way to go, and everything that he does right now is a smokescreen to get to that objective. And when I'm talking to people in DC on this regards, what worries me the most, that everybody is saying that Belarus is a gun case already, that they already resigned to the idea that Putin is going to get Belarus. And I don't think it's a gun case. There are Belarusian people who did not say their word on what's going to happen. And from the other side, Lukashenko, he doesn't want this as well. So these are totally opposing poles, but nevertheless, they both do not want such annexation to happen.
Ilya, I agree with you. I met Lukashenko for dinner in his home when we were trying to get the OSCE observers back for the elections. I agree with you that the Belarus people have their own minds, and they have not approved and do not approve the relationship that Lukashenko and Putin have been building on. But I have to add this about opportunities missed. I was in the Congress when Putin did reach out, and I went to the White House when he offered to establish a bilateral. And I told you about this. At the time, the person who was put in charge of Rostechnology was Chemyshev, Putin's former boss in the KGB. And I went with him to the State Department and the Pentagon when he offered to the US to establish a bilateral, that they would consult with us whenever our enemies tried to buy weapons. And it was the US side that did not take that action. I explained that to you. And the same thing with our mutual friend Velikov at Kurchatov, when he came over and offered to establish a bilateral, that any time that a nuclear material was going to go into Iran, that bilateral would oversee that. A great opportunity for us. I took that to the White House. Velikov was very respected. On the non-Luger program, he was the most respected Russian, I think you'll agree, on cooperative threat reduction. And we missed. So there are opportunities we've missed that we cannot let happen again. Now we've got Putin in effect, as I agree with you, out of control. But we cannot let him use Ukraine and think he's going to get away with an invasion, that we're not going to respond much more aggressively than what I think would be the case. But I am also agree with you now. I don't think he's going to do that. I think this is a shell game. I think it's a chess match. And I think he's building up to get maximum influence because he feels that with this administration, he can get more now than what he got in the past. You agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, his end game is to have is to take both Belarus and Ukraine and probably Transnistria, but the order, firstly Belarus and then Ukraine, because Belarus he thinks could be taken without bloodshed, without significant violence. It's an easy target.
Putin's moves are acceptable, which he doesn't want to do. I know the Belarus people. There's a strong diaspora of Belarus in America. Many of my friends, they're outraged at this. But we've got to show more willingness to have a dialogue with Lukashenko, which I think would help us. And whether he responds immediately or not, just the fact that we reach out and have a dialogue and discussion with him, I think would help in the overall situation.
Yeah, if I were West, I would definitely use Ukraine, personally Zelensky, as a mediator with Lukashenko, because it's in Ukraine's best national interest that Belarus not becoming part of Russia and not falls under control of Putin, because that's another 1,000 kilometers of the border and a military threat. That's why it's Ukraine's key interest to keep Belarus independent, no matter what.
We haven't said much about nuclear weapons, and we have an interesting question. Mr. Ponomarev, you mentioned energy as being a geopolitical tool for advancing Russia's foreign policy. To what extent are nuclear weapons relevant to underpinning and or advancing the Russian foreign policy?
Well, I think that the way Kremlin sees it, it's like a veto power in world affairs, but probably not really more than that, because you cannot use it in a conventional military exercise. And I think that Putin's approach, which is very much shared by approach of Sergei Shoigu, the Minister of Defense, is that during Yeltsin's time, Russia didn't care about conventional military, and they needed to be rebuilt. Obviously it's way over exaggerated in the West, the degree they were rebuilt, but obviously a significant effort to make them at least operational, which they were not in the 90s. During Shoigu's time, such effort was made, and it was showcased in different examples in Georgia, unfortunately in Ukraine, with Crimea, and very much could be shown in Belarus pretty soon. That's why I think that Putin would actually agree to whatever like visible compromises in terms of nuclear arms control. He has a certain, I wouldn't say it's like short-term agenda, but he would like to have a concession on behalf of the West to remove missile pads from Poland, and probably he would be ready to trade Kaliningrad Iskanders for this, which NATO believes is a violation of short and medium range missile treaty. That most likely can be achieved. If combined Russia and the West can drag into this process China, that also would work for everyone's benefit. So I think that at the end of the day here, the interest is aligned, because Russia also doesn't want any other countries to join the nuclear club, etc., etc.
Ilya, that's a point I would ask you to respond to, if I can interject. My concern is that we're pushing Putin deeper and deeper into a relationship with China that is not a natural relationship. And what are your comments about, do you agree with me that the actions of the West are in fact doing that, and that you agree that they're, whether it's offensive cyber attacks or whatever, that we're creating a relationship there that we've not seen in the past?
You know, there is another Russian saying, is against whom we are friends. our friends, yes, and that very much reflects the relationship with China. But to my mind, this relationship is tactical, is not strategic, and they would never be strategic. At the end of the day, when Russians look at themselves in the mirror, including Mr. Putin, they don't see a Chinese face, but they see a European face.
I agree.
And culturally, Putin likes to say that we are the true Europeans. It's the bloody Europeans who forgot about the ancestry and the culture and the religion and whatever. We are the true Europeans. We stick to the core values of our civilization. And at the end of the day, I do believe in the alliance when Putin would begin the broader northern union of Judeo-Christian states, the biblical states also, so to say, it's like Russia, European Union, United States, Latin America. We are way closer to each other based on our values, fundamental values, than we are with Asia, with all respect, nothing against them, obviously, and we should be peaceful and friendly with them, but still it's a different set of values. And I was representing Siberia for a very long time in the Russian parliament. I know that we in Siberia, we know the threat that is coming from China. The demographic disbalance on the border, on the Russian side of the border, northern side of Russian-Chinese border, like 15 million people, and on the Chinese side, 150 million people. It's exactly 1 to 10. So it's very threatening, but China at the same time, they're not aggressive. They know that they would expand technologically, demographically, and I think again Putin trades tactical advantage to strategic disadvantage. He feeds Chinese with technologies, he feeds Chinese with natural resources. So he strengthens that nation, not getting much in return, because at the same time Russian government is afraid of letting Chinese to invest in Russia because they think they would get too much control, so they are feeding them with resources, but the backflow is extremely limited. And Chinese, they also look at Russia with the same attitude. They understand that if say United States, European Union would make a deal with Russia, Putin and all his cronies, they would jump on that boat immediately. That they're just waiting to make a deal, that they are blackmailing the West with the union between Russia and China. That's why there is no fundamental trust from China towards Russian leaders as well. And that's I think probably is the game Washington is playing, because even minor compromises that could be reached at this very moment, it's a very powerful signal with Chinese that this process is ongoing, and it would weaken this alliance.
Mr. Ponomarev, this has been absolutely fascinating, and alas, we have come to the end of our time. But we are very grateful to you and to Marina and to the Honorable Curt Weldon for being with us here today. I would like to say one note to our audience that we understand from a few of you that you had trouble with the sound. We will be posting this video within the next 24 hours, and hopefully we can fix some of the sound issues that some of you may have been experiencing, as well as we will try to produce a transcript of this conversation, this important conversation. So saying goodbye to you now all. Thank you so much for being with us today. We're truly grateful, and thank you again to Mr. Ponomarev, Marina Kats,
Thank you.
Congressman Weldon.
Congressman Weldon.
Thank you very much.
Good job.
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Ponomarev,
Thank you very much.
and thank you to
Thank you very
FPRI for bringing this program.
And thanks for watching us.